Welcome to Inspire Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower, educate, and inspire men in a positive way. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. So before I get into anything deep and meaningful, I do have something deep and pleasurable, which is I'm sitting here with a brand new pair of headphones from Master and Dynamic, the 65 variety. And this is the first time that I'm wearing them for a podcast. I did have a quick hit of Santana and Pink Floyd when I got them yesterday. And you know, I must say I was absolutely stoked with the comfort of wearing these headphones and also the quality, the sound quality that I got from them. Now, some of you who are a bit bass heavy might go, oh, maybe there's not enough bass or all of that. Put it aside. From the point of view of good overall sound quality at a high level, I haven't heard too many headphones that beat these guys. So very, very stoked with it's not really a toy, but with my new audiophile accessory. Okay, so where are we going today? Well, I want to carry on from the last podcast about what is this thing called love, and from those of you who've got a bit of a sense of humour, you could have transposed that to what is this thing called love. So a bit of play with punctuation just to keep it lighthearted, but where I want to pick up today fundamentally is I want to look at, what happens when love goes wrong. And in my career, I've spent a huge amount of time working with couples. I've actually taken a sabbatical from working with couples for lots of different reasons. But predominantly because I really wanted to focus my attention on working with individual men and, teenage boys to men, as well as working with them individually, but also in groups. And so from a, point of view of having the energy to then work with couples, I've gone, well, let me take a break from that, because in my experience, if you're working predominantly with couples, it's high energy stuff. And, I believe in taking care of myself and, mixing it up a bit. And at this stage in my career, I've sort of gone, okay, where do I want really to devote and focus my attention to? So, however, that doesn't take away from my extensive experience working with couples. Now, if I look at, the whole thing about couples, we come back to that little notion of attachment, okay? And, most couples who are securely attached, that doesn't mean that they can't benefit from couples work. It might not be so much deep therapy, but it could be some coaching. How do you enhance your relationship? Even when it's good, how can you make it better? And certainly for couples that are going long term, I think that's a very, very important aspect to the relationship, is how to, keep it snappy, keep it passionate, keep it engaged in a way that is really deeply satisfying, where both of you as individuals can thrive. Okay, so let's flip the vinyl. Let's look at this thing when it goes wrong. And so people, there's lots of stuff that's been written about why, couples often, don't work well. And in many respects, from my perspective, the immediate core of that is each individual's attachment to themselves. I mean, how secure are you in yourself? Okay, so in secure parenting, we usually focus on our attention on the child and we love them unconditionally. That doesn't mean I'm going to let them get away with murder in terms of their behaviour, but I'm going to make sure that part of my unconditional love is also respect, and that I focus on often strength rather than deficit. But sometimes I've got to be a bit blunt and point out when my child or my children are not really doing the right thing. And that can be assessed in all sorts of different ways. Now, in that context, one of the things that I really want to stress is that if we are looking at an individual who has poor attachment, okay, and we can talk about anxious, avoidant, disorganized attachment, we need to have a little bit of an understanding, and certainly as a therapist, I need a really good understanding and good history about what that person may have experienced as a child, okay? And it doesn't necessarily mean deep-seated physical and emotional abuse. You know, the whole idea of childhood trauma can be, you know, what in some environments is seen as being perfectly appropriate and okay. You know, once upon a time we used to beat kids with a wooden spoon, a stick, or whatever else thing that came along that could inflict, you know, physical pain. And as some clients have shared with me, is in their family it wasn't physical pain that was met out, but it was emotional aggression and violence. And for those clients, they often say, I would have rather have been hit because the physical pain and the wounds heal much more readily than the emotional. Now, I don't quite agree with that. I think both are as bad as each other in many respects. I mean, what are we teaching a child when we go out there and we keep hitting them? Okay. Now, occasionally, as some parents, you know, might smack once in a blue moon. You know, it's not a good thing, but, you know, it's also, you know, something that, you know, we need to sort of give ourselves a bit of a leeway and compassion with at times, because kids can be challenging. Now, most kids who act out on a sort of moderate to high level persistently, then I do need to look at what's happening for me as a parent. Is my child acting out my childhood trauma? What's going on here, right? And this is where I really depart strongly from any sort of authoritarian approach about parenting. For example, Jordan Peterson in 12 Rules has a chapter which basically goes, you know, don't let your child do anything that's going to upset you in a way or shame you or whatever. I can't remember the exact words. I'll dig it out for the next podcast. But to me, that's like, oh, hang on a minute. In fact, there are some instances where my child has every right to challenge me in how I'm being. Okay, so let me sort of go very quickly into a sort of synopsis of where anxious, avoidant, and disorganized attachment stuff comes from. What sort of parental behavior is in the background of that? And so let's start off with being anxious. And some people refer to this as also as preoccupied attachment. And essentially the development of an anxious attachment style, sometimes referred to as anxious preoccupied or anxious ambivalent in children, it's often associated with an inconsistent parenting pattern. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, the parent runs hot and cold. One moment the child is the best thing since sliced bread, and then the next moment the parent is extremely critical of that child and in some instances quite punitive. Okay? So essentially the parent's going to be supportive and responsive to the child's needs and then at other times completely switched off. Now, here's the thing. In today's culture, one of the problems with parenting is that a lot of us as parents are addicted to the digital space. And so one of the things that I often see walking around in the supermarket or just in general is parents with their children, and the child is trying to engage with the parent in conversation or in some interaction, and the parent doesn't respond because they're on their phone texting and so on. The child then needs to escalate, and that's when the child gets a response from a parent, usually an angry one. Okay. So what about the other poor attachment style? So let's talk about avoidant, and some people refer to that as dismissive. And this emerges when we've got a parent or parents who are strict and emotionally distant, okay? And they don't really tolerate or handle any expression of feelings very well. Yet they expect their child to be independent and tough, right? So this whole process of being able to acknowledge and validate what you're feeling as a child is restrained by the parent. There's a taboo. So, for example, a lot of us in our family situations, especially if a parent happens to be very angry and expresses that often very loudly, as a child growing up in that, I'm going to go, I'm going to, suppress that. Either that or I'm going to act out. But most of the time, a lot of people will simply suppress feelings of anger, but they will also then suppress other feelings of joy and happiness and so on. Okay, so we will then sometimes also do that to others. Okay, so the third one is the disorganized attachment style, also known as fearful avoidant. And that style comes about when the child's caregivers or parents, who's supposed to be really the source of feeling safe, actually induce fear. They become a source of fear. Okay? Very, very difficult. Okay? A bit of a tough go. So I want you to keep this in mind, because consistently as a therapist and as a watcher of the media, a lot of couples, high-profile couples, end up, out there, and their relationships exposed to scrutiny, and often people sort of take, sides, and it's understandable in many respects that we sort of go, oh, well, it looks like she's doing the wrong thing and he's doing the wrong thing. And the current one is fundamentally Amber Heard and Johnny Depp's situation. Now, I don't have a very clear insight, obviously, as an outsider, in what might have gone on for each individual, what might have gone on for Amber and what might have gone on for Johnny Depp in their childhood and growing up. I do know that I've seen in the media that Amber Heard apparently is quite a difficult person to get on with, whereas a lot of people sort of describe Johnny Depp as a much, much more easygoing person. But the problem is that when two people with these attachment issues get together, what comes out of that? All right, what emerges? Okay, so at this point, again, let me stress, like always, that I'm not diagnosing, but I want people to think before laying blame or before attributing, criticism. Now, if what we're seeing with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard is true, then we're looking at a very different kettle of fish with Amber Heard, because there are certain things which strike me as being quite Machiavellian and definitely narcissistic. Okay, so why might a person be Machiavellian and narcissistic, especially as a female? Well, there's social expectations, but also there's more than likely a deep-seated narcissistic wound that might happen, or the person has always been indulged, so they've got a deep-seated sense of entitlement. But the key thing is they don't empathise very well. Okay, so I'm just using that couple as a bit of sort of, stepping stone. Now I'm going to run through some issues that emerge if you've got one of these attachment styles. So if you're anxious, what are you likely going to be doing in a relationship? So as an anxiously attached person, I'm going to really crave feelings of closeness and intimacy with my partner, right? But at the same time, I'm going to be struggling to trust them. And this is one of the things that I frequently see with young men, and it generates this sense of potential jealousy. Is she going to cheat on me? The relationship, generally speaking, when you're anxious, when you've got an anxious attachment style, is that the relationship takes focal point. It's almost like you become obsessive about it, and you become overly fixated on your partner. You might have difficulties with boundaries, and seeing space between the two of you as not just a challenge, but actually as a threat, wherein you might act out with anger or fear. Okay, another issue with the anxious attachment style is that your self-worth is going to rest with the other person. Okay, and how you feel when you're being treated in the relationship, and you tend to overreact to any perceived threats to that relationship. Now, if you happen to tee up with someone who's even moderately narcissistic, this can get very messy. Okay, so again, I've spoken about jealousy, but the other thing that you're going to be doing a lot is fishing for reassurance and attention. And this is interesting because other people might give you the feedback that you're being too needy or clingy, and that you're avoiding maintaining your other intimate relationships. So that's the anxious one. Now, if you've got an avoidant or dismissive attachment style, you come across as a highly independent person, being really self-sufficient, and you don't necessarily feel a strong need for others. And in fact, when someone tries to get close to you, the more you feel that you need to pull back, and you're uncomfortable with your feelings and your partner's feelings, and sometimes project, like you're going to be accusing your partner of being distant, rigid and intolerant, and you might even accuse them of being too needy. So one of the things that's going to happen in that attachment pattern is that rather than seeking long-term intimate relationships, you're going to go for the more casual, right? Even to the point where they're just serial monogamous relationships, but they don't get the distance. They don't have the longevity wherein you can really become deeply, deeply attached to each other. Now, the issue with this one is that you might have rationalized this all out and gone, yeah, but I'm perfectly okay with that. But the reality is, in order to feel healthy and in order to thrive, we as human beings are fundamentally hardwired to connect. And deep down, even the sort of dismissive attachment style person really, really wants that intimacy. Now, the beauty of all of this is that attachment styles are not, solidly cast in concrete. Like a lot of things about ourselves, we can learn how to change this. And so I was thinking that what do I do for the next sort of podcast? And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what is it that we can do to take real ownership? Because if I'm in a space where I'm constantly critical in some way of my partner, or if I keep accusing them of not giving me what I need, I first of all need to look at my stuff in the relationship. What is my contribution to the problem in the relationship? And then I have a responsibility, not just to myself, but also to the relationship and to the other person to get in there and do something about it. Alternatively, you're just going to be another statistic on a pretty appalling divorce rate. And I'm sure most of us don't actually want that. Most of us don't set out to get into a hostile, aggressive, separation and divorce. It somehow seems to come out, though, when this thing called love goes wrong. So, it is a fundamental process that we need to get some understanding and awareness of before we ditch the other person or the relationship or both. Because some people stay in a relationship, but they're actually not connected. I'm sure that you've seen this time and time again. So I hope that was, as always, useful. Certainly food for thought for you guys out there at some point. If you want to do a lot more on this, you can read my book, Making Good Men Great, Surfing a New Masculinity, because that gives some broader insights into, what patriarchy does to us that interferes with our capacity to function emotionally within ourselves, but also in relationships. So just Google Making Good Men Great, Surfing a New Masculinity, and have a look, have a read, have a think. Until next time, this is me signing off.
Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email miranda@nortainment.com. That's miranda@noirtainment.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.